Good morning. Today is October 27th, which is the second anniversary of the horrific Pittsburgh Synagogue Tree of Life Massacre, when a deranged white supremacist gunman entered a synagogue on Shabbat morning and murdered 11 worshippers in cold blood. Since then, we've had many other terrifying anti-Semitic attacks, including Poway, California, as well as the New Jersey massacre, as well as Muncie. And now 2 years later, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and the Tree of Life Synagogue is not even open anymore because they're now dispersed and find themselves on Zoom. But we remember today, especially before the election, we recognize that there's anti-Semitism both on the extreme right and on the extreme left. And whichever party wins the White House, there will be work to be done to eradicate anti-Semitism. But where did anti-Semitism begin? This week's Torah portion is Lech Lecha, where God chooses the first Jewish couple, Abraham and Sarah, to be the founders of a new nation. And in the very first Torah portion of Abraham and Sarah, God comes to them and makes a covenant with them. And it's called Brit Bein Habsarim, the covenant between the parts. Because in the olden days, the custom was that when you made a covenant, you would take animals, you would cut them in half, and the people who were making the covenant would walk through the parts of the animal, symbolizing the fact that just like these parts can never be put together of the animals, this covenant can never be broken between these parties. And God makes a promise to Abraham and Sarah that I will always be your God and you will always be my nation, and as God is eternal, the Jewish people will be an eternal nation. However, when this covenant begins, the Torah says in this week's parsha that a darkness, a dreaded, fearful darkness overcame Abraham. Why? Because God was going to tell him that yes, your nation, your offspring, the Jewish people will be an eternal nation. However, they will go through much suffering and exile, beginning with the exile in the land of Egypt, where they will be slaves and be persecuted for 400 years. However, God goes on to say, I will take them out of Egypt with great success, with great wonders, with great miracles, with great wealth, and I will bring them to the land of Israel, and the land of Israel will become their eternal inheritance. And here we are some 3,800 years after this covenant was made, and we see the astonishing accuracy of God's promise fulfilled to the T, that despite all the exiles and all the suffering and all the hardships we've gone through as a nation, miraculously we've survived in every generation, outlived all of our enemies, and we have come back to the land of Israel, although we were exiled multiple times from the land of Israel, and it remains our eternal heritage until this very day. And then the verse says in this week's parsha that when the animals, the carcasses were on the ground, birds of prey swooped down and tried to eat from the carcasses of the animals. And Abraham chases away these birds of prey. And the commentaries, Yonatan ben Azil, explain what is the symbolism of the birds of prey trying to eat the flesh of the animals, and Abraham shooing away, driving away the birds of prey. This was symbolic that in every generation there will be nations like the birds of prey who will try to come and destroy the Jewish people. But time and again, like Abraham drove away the birds, we will chase away our enemies, we will prevail and overcome all of our adversaries. And indeed, this is perhaps the greatest miracle of human history, the miracle of Jewish history. How despite all the mighty nations that have risen up against us, we have overcome all of them, including the ones in our generation as recently as what we are commemorating today, just 2 years ago on October 27th, the attack in Pittsburgh. And this is the internal sign of the covenant that has been upheld in every single generation. And we see the prophetic vision that Abraham saw being played out throughout all of history. But the ultimate hope is the promise that we will not only come back to the land of Israel, but ultimately Mashiach will come and we will live in peace, as we're starting to see sproutings of peace in the Middle East, that the world will come together and recognize the futility of trying to destroy the Jewish people. Just conclude with a story, after the greatest tragedy known to mankind, the Holocaust. In 1960, Israel captured Adolf Eichmann, Yimach Shemo. and brought him to trial, and he was hanged in Jerusalem for his crimes against the Jewish people in 1962. 50 years later, in the year 2012, Israel unsealed the files of the Eichmann abduction, kidnapping, and everything that was involved in bringing him to trial and holding him accountable for his evil and his crimes. And it was revealed the name of the Mossad agent whose job was to watch Eichmann, to watch over him in the Israeli prisons as he went through the trial process, to make sure that he doesn't commit suicide, that he's not poisoned, that he's not assassinated, so that he could live to see his day in court and be judged for his deeds. And this Mossad agent was contacted by a very prominent German media outlet, and they said, we would like to interview you about the final days of Eichmann's life, since you were the one who was guarding Eichmann in his final years and days of his life. And this Israeli Mossad agent said, fine, I'm willing to sit down to an interview. And they said, fine, we will have a studio that you will come to, and we will do the interview. And the Mossad agent said, no, I don't want to do the interview in a studio. They said, where would you like to do it? He said, I would like to do it at the Western Wall on this and this day, on Thursday morning at 8 a.m. It was an odd request to do an interview at the Western Wall at 8 a.m., but they had no choice, and they came on that given time to the Western Wall, only to find the wall packed with thousands of people praying and celebrating bar mitzvahs and celebrations at the wall, with a lot of noise and turmoil and excitement and fervor and passion and prayer at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. Well, they tried to find a quiet corner, and with the best they can with microphones conducted the interview. And the last question the interviewer turned to this Mossad agent to ask him is, he said, I just must ask you, we wanted to do the interview in a quiet studio. Why did you insist on doing it at the Western Wall? And on a Thursday morning when there's bar mitzvahs, hundreds of bar mitzvahs taking place, and singing and dancing and celebrations and Torah readings and hundreds, if not thousands of people at the wall, why did you choose to do it here? And this Israeli Mossad agent said, because over 60 years ago, the German nation tried to obliterate and annihilate the Jewish people. They thought that they could send us to the gas chambers and do away with us, rid us from the face of the world, and to relegate us to history books. I know that this interview will be broadcast throughout Germany, and it will reach every German home. I want every German citizen sitting in their home watching the interview to see that we, the Jewish people, have returned to our homeland as promised by God, that we are a vibrant, thriving nation in the land of Israel, in our capital, Jerusalem, praying at our ancient temple, Western Wall. I want them to know that they failed, and I want the world to know that they will never succeed in, God forbid, destroying the Jewish people. Because, as this week's parasha says, God told Abraham, yes, it will be a difficult journey. Lech lecha, you are going on a journey, Abraham, and this journey will continue with your descendants from generation to generation. And there will be birds of prey, but ultimately, miraculously, God's protection will be upon the Jewish people. And without any rational explanation, you will see my hand in history, how you, the tiniest, smallest of all nations, constituting less than 1/4% of the world's population, will outlive all the mighty regimes, all those enemies who rise up against you. Am Yisrael Chai.